Thank you, music team. I think those words to those songs are going to be perfect to bring us into our time in the Word this morning. As we start to near the end of this road to redemption that we've been on, if you were using Google Maps, this is about the time to start saying your destination is on the right. We're approaching our final intersections, but as we do, we come to one of the most fascinating and well-loved stories in all the Old Testament, and one which introduces to us some pretty powerful themes, not just in isolation, but as a wrap-up of some of the echoes and hints at this theme that we've seen all along the way so far. And that, of course, is the story of Joseph. If you have your notes, you can see this is Joseph Part 1, because they were at least a little bit merciful and didn't give me chapters 37 through 50 to do in 1 week. I've at least got 2 weeks to work through that. And this morning, we're going to look at chapters 37 through 40. And as we do, we're going to confront right off the bat a doctrine that has a pretty interesting place in the life of the church, because few doctrines can you attribute to more conflict and strife and grief and comfort and security and peace than this doctrine, and that is the doctrine or the teaching of the sovereignty of God. That God operates over all things with His powerful hand, bringing to pass His good pleasure in everything. It is sometimes so obvious and simple, and at other times it's so troubling and paradoxical. But it is at all times, as we're going to see, inescapably true. And I don't know if you've ever had an experience where you're trying to explain something to somebody, and it's really hard to find exactly the right words to describe it. And so finally you say, well, just let me show you, right? And you take them and just show them what you're talking about. And oh, now it makes sense. And the life of Joseph, I think, is a great way to do that with the doctrine of God's sovereignty. Sometimes we wrestle through all of our definitions and all of our special cases, but in the life of Joseph, sometimes you can just say, come, let me show you. Let me show you what this looks like in the life of this patriarch. God often moves in ways that we least expect, and often He does so without a word of explanation as to why or how things will work out. And perhaps this morning you find yourself in just such a time. And if not, you almost certainly will at some point in the future. And so let us ask ourselves this morning as we look at the life of Joseph, how are we to understand God and follow Him when life goes upside down? How does a man, for example, such as Horatio Spafford, suffer the loss of his business in the Great Chicago Fire, suffer the loss of his son the same year to pneumonia, suffer the loss of his wife and 4 daughters to a shipping accident, and then, while sailing over the waters where his family drowned, write the words, "When peace like a river attendeth my way, when sorrows like sea billows roll, whatever my lot, thou hast taught me to say, it is well with my soul." And I pray that as we look at the life of Joseph, we will see something of the precious perspective that comforted and strengthened Joseph, and that should comfort and strengthen us as well. And so this week we will look at the working of God's sovereignty in the midst of 2 settings that are most likely to cause us to tempt us and to question God, and those settings are sin and suffering. How do we understand God, and how do we trust in His context, or in His sovereignty in the context of sin and of suffering? And so first this morning we're going to look at God as sovereign over sin. God is sovereign over sin in chapters 37 to 38. And for some background, remember where we're dropping into this story in our road to redemption. Abraham has left the land of his fathers and traveled to the land of Canaan. The covenant of God is made with Abraham and then is renewed through the son of promise born to Abraham and Sarah, Isaac. Isaac also wanders about the land of Canaan, giving birth to 2 sons, Jacob and Esau. Jacob, a deceiver, swindles his brother of his birthright and also received the inheritance of the line of covenantal blessing. Jacob's life is one of hardship as he worked with a difficult father-in-law and an angry brother, and because of the consequences of his own decisions. And though Jacob eventually freed himself from the first, the father-in-law, and made peace with the second, his brother, he does not get to settle down and enjoy much rest. And as the curtain lifts on our chapter, Jacob is now the father of 12 sons, 6 by his first wife Leah, 2 by his second wife Rachel, and 2 each by the maids of Leah and Rachel respectively. His beloved wife Rachel has died giving birth to her second son Benjamin, and Jacob has never fully recovered. And that brings us to chapter 37, where we see the introduction to our passage. Look with me at verses 1 and 2. Now Jacob lived in the land where his father had sojourned, in the land of Canaan. These are the records of the generations of Jacob. Joseph, when 17 years of age, was pasturing the flock with his brothers while he was still a youth, along with the sons of Bilhah and the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives. And Joseph brought back a bad report about them to their father. So we see here at the beginning of this chapter that Jacob is in the right place to receive the promises of God, but that hasn't actually happened yet. They are in Canaan. They are in the land God promised to give to Abraham and to his descendants forever. And just like Abraham and just like Isaac, Jacob is in the land, but it's not his yet. He's still sojourning. He's wandering about. He's sitting in tents. He hasn't yet seen God give them possession of the land. God give them a nation in the land. God give them an avenue by which to be God's conduit to all the peoples of the earth, as God had promised. And so they're just wandering around, waiting. Can you relate? Here's a quick lesson for us. Sometimes waiting isn't getting in the way of God's plan. Oftentimes waiting is God's plan. And that's where Jacob finds himself. God will bring his promises to pass, but for now, that has meant sitting in a tent. The issue of just sitting around and not doing what we should be doing is a serious one of laziness or a lack of faith. But sometimes doing what God has called us to do means just sitting and waiting where he has placed us. Notice also that in chapter 37, we see this open by telling us that this is the record not of Joseph, but of Jacob. There is no question that Joseph is the dominant character in the remaining chapters, but he isn't actually the main character. This is not the story primarily to tell us about Joseph. It's the story to tell us about Jacob and how his family is going to continue. If you want to remember what these chapters underscore, you can remember the 3 J's. 37 through 50 is all about Jacob, Judah, and Joseph, in that order. These are the 3 people who are most important to what God is doing at this time. Jacob is the one who is fathering the nation of promise. Judah is the one who will lead that nation. And Joseph is the one who will preserve that nation. But right now, they are all sitting around in tents and sitting around in sin. This is one very dysfunctional family. And so we're going to see in looking at God's sovereignty over sin that God is sovereign over all the quote-unquote little sins that we encounter in life. We already read verses 1 and 2, but continue with me in looking at verses 3 and 4. Now Israel loved Joseph more than all his sons because he was the son of his old age, and he made him a varicolored tunic. His brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, and so they hated him and could not speak to him on friendly terms. So behind these verses are a pile of problems that we have already seen in the lives of the patriarchs. There are multiple fracture lines running through this family, and I think they're fractures that all too often we see within our own families, and we see by extension even within our church. First of all, we see that the brothers aren't united. They are living in a home of disunity. Notice back in verse 2 that it says, Joseph is pasturing the flock with 3 groups of people. His brothers, the sons of Bilhah, and the sons of Zilpah. Remember, Bilhah and Zilpah aren't friends. They're the mothers of 4 of the tribes of Israel. And so we have this category of the sons of Leah and Rachel, the sons of Zilpah, the sons of Bilhah, and they're all separated out. It doesn't just say Joseph was out with his brothers. There's a hierarchy that these brothers are observing. They're not all being lumped in together. Only the sons of Leah and Rachel are the ones who see themselves as the true brethren, and the others are some other kind of separate category in their mind. So that's the first rift. It's a blended family that never blended. And that's a problem that affected not just Jacob, but it also affected Abraham's family with Isaac and Ishmael. God's design for a family is one man, one woman to come together for life, but in a broken world, that doesn't always happen, and it's not always possible. There are lessons for us here as well, besides not marrying a bunch of wives and their handmaidens, which is also a good lesson. But you may find yourself in a situation, and it could be because past decisions that you made were sinful, and it could have nothing to do with sin, but have to do with death and remarriage or other circumstances that blend a family together. And it's a good lesson for us to make sure that the boundaries of our family encircle all of its members, that we do not divide our family up by any other categories. And that holds true not just for the nuclear family, but it also holds true for the family of God in the church. A church that views people of different categories as being somehow in different places on the hierarchy of acceptance or membership is a church in trouble. If people from one cultural or socioeconomic background feel comfortable, and people from another cultural or socioeconomic background feel other, then that's a church where strife is already brewing, and it's just a matter of time before it will spill over into disunity. Second thing we see in the family of Jacob is the problem of disobedience. Jacob sends his son off to take care of the flock, but evidently they use the opportunity when they are away to act irresponsibly. There is some reason to wonder at the motives of Joseph in running back to daddy with this report. We aren't told what they are in Scripture. We don't know if Joseph is a tattletale or if, like we're going to see a little bit later, his father Jacob sends him specifically to get a report. But in either case, the report comes back and it's a bad one. There is a pattern of immaturity and disobedience here that we see not only in the lives of Jacob and his children, but often in the lives of us today. It used to be that a calling card of the young was acting wild and crazy when they got out of the eyesight of authority. Now it's not necessarily just the calling card of the young. We're seeing a culture overrun with an attitude of disobedience. And it is a symptom of a culture that has rejected the authority of God and then the authority of anybody else that God has put over us in our lives. And the sons of Jacob, we can see now, have inherited their father's penchant for defying authority and acting in their own best interest. And so we too need to be careful. If we require the direct oversight of those in authority over us to prompt our obedience, and if the watchful eye of God alone isn't sufficient motivation, then we don't need a Joseph to bring back a bad report. The eyes of God have already seen our work and knows that it is just wood, hay, and stubble. Beware of disobedience and a lack of respect for authority within our families and within the family of God. Thirdly, we see the problem of favoritism. And this is the one which is going to be the proverbial straw that breaks the camel's back. This is the rift that will turn into the schism. Joseph is doted upon by his father. Joseph, the oldest son of his favorite wife. Joseph, the plucky son born to an aging and weary man. The heart of Jacob is attached to Joseph more than to all of his other children. The famous coat of many colors is just the symbol of the heart problem in Jacob. And this isn't new. Abraham loved Isaac more than Ishmael. And that set the descendants of both children against each other to this day. Jacob himself knew the sting of favoritism. He was the favorite of his mother, but not his father. Isaac loved Esau most. And this chafed Jacob so much that he went about an elaborate process of deception to steal his brother's blessing. Again, putting him and his brother, the children of Isaac, at odds. The Edomites were the descendants of Esau and fought against the Israelites throughout their history, up to and including a famous Edomite you may have heard of called Herod the Great. The sibling rivalry in Jacob's family extended all the way to the time of Christ. Now Jacob's favoritism was sowing the same seeds of anger and hostility among his own children. They have not learned. As verse 4 says, the brothers saw that Joseph was loved more than they, and so they hated him. That's a strong word in English. It's a strong word in Hebrew. It means to view someone as an enemy, to divorce yourself from somebody and break off all relational ties, to turn away from, to have fierce and deep animosity. And this is often what happens in the wake of favoritism. Many times, those who are the outside group when favoritism is taking place either are unable or unwilling to lash out at the one who is actually showing favoritism, and so they lash out at the one to whom favoritism is shown. The anger is often directed that way, and that is the case in Jacob's family. They hate their brother. And so time for us to look at our own lives, especially those of us who are parents. Do we show favoritism among our children? It is natural to have a stronger natural affiliation with children who share a personality similar to ours. But it is sinful to base our love for our children on their actions or their antics or their personality. Remember this, we are not to love others the way we love God. We're to love others the way God loved us. We love God because He is worthy. He is good because of the love that He has shown us. We don't love others that way, though. We don't love others on those grounds. We are to love others regardless of their worthiness, because that's how we imitate the love that God had for us when He was certainly not attracted to our personality. This is critical also in the life of the church. Our love for one another must rise above the level of favoritism. And while there will be people in any group this size with whom we have a strong natural affinity, we must demonstrate that the bonds of love we have are based on the love of God for us and not upon the natural earthly attractions that we might have in the flesh. James 2:9 warns us of this very thing when he says in James 2:9, if you show partiality, you are committing sin and are convicted by the law as transgressors. And lastly, in the family of Jacob, we see pride. In verses 5 through 11, we see the famous telling of Joseph's dreams. These dreams are the only time, interestingly enough, that God reveals Himself directly to Joseph. Unlike Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, to whom God revealed Himself often through direct, verbal, or other direct revelation and said, this is the promise I'm making with you, this is what I'm going to do for you, this is what you need to do. Joseph only has these dreams as the only direct revelation he ever receives from God. And even that is somewhat indirect and ambiguous at that. File that away, because the faith of Joseph, we're going to see, is incredible, especially given how little interaction directly he had with his God. And then when you consider that we have the full revelation of God in our hands that we can look to at any time, it really is mind-boggling. But Joseph is given these two dreams. The first is found in verses 6 and 7. He says to his brothers, please listen to this dream which I have had. For behold, you were binding sheaves in the field, and lo, my sheaf rose up and also stood erect, and behold, your sheaves gathered around and bowed down to my sheaf. And so this dream pertains specifically to Joseph's brothers, and Joseph is obviously saying here, hey, I had a dream where one day I am going to be in charge of all of you and you're all going to bow down to me. And in some families, a pronouncement like this from a younger sibling would just elicit a laugh, or maybe a noogie, right? Oh, Joseph. Silly Joseph. But in this family, it says the brothers respond only by more hatred. By more hatred. They see the dream not as a possible prophecy or a prediction or even as just a silly dream of a younger brother. They see it as a manifestation of the favoritism that has been boiling in their hearts as bitterness. And so they respond with hatred. And Joseph, apparently not one to notice subtle things like hatred burning in your brother's eyes, has another dream, and this time shares it at supper with the whole family, including Dad. Look at verse 9. Now he had still another dream and related it to his brothers and said, "Lo, I have had still another dream." And there should have been a reaction in the brothers that Joseph saw that stopped him right there, right? But that's not really important right now. Anyway, but he goes on, "Behold, the sun and the moon and 11 stars were bowing down to me." He related it to his father and to his brothers. And his father rebuked him and said to him, "What is this dream that you have had? Shall I and your mother and your brothers actually come to bow ourselves down before you to the ground?" His brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the saying in mind. So this time Joseph is rebuked by his father. Nobody wants to listen to Joseph. The tensions in the family are all palpable on the surface, right? There's just this underlying stress and tension in the home because there's no underlying peace. There's no underlying love. And the favoritism and the bitterness and the jealousy and even Jacob as the scheming father, they all are operating out of pride and self-seeking. And anything that suggests that someday there is going to be a humbling and an exaltation, they instinctively react to with anger and rebuke. And it says that even though Joseph is rebuked by his father, the brothers aren't pacified by that, like finally, Dad told Joseph what's what. It says they became even more jealous of Joseph as a result, despite Jacob's rebuke. But at least Jacob, who has had an experience with dreams, despite the fact that he publicly rebukes Joseph, files that dream away, it says, and remembers it. And that will get pulled out later. Pride causes us to miss what God is doing. It causes us to attribute everything to the worst possible explanation, instead of choosing the path of love, which, as Paul taught us, hopes all things and believes all things. Pride causes us to rush when we should wait and drag our feet when we should move. So how's this all supposed to hit us? There's a lot of problems going on here. Joseph is right in the middle of it all. And what I want us to take away from this section is this: God is at work in the muck of common sin. All of it. All of this brokenness, all of this dysfunction, God is using it to set up the events that will forever change the history of Jacob's line and preserve the people of God from extinction. From a personal perspective, we can learn a lot from Jacob's family about how to not do family. Our own personal ones are in the church of God. But on the receiving end, we can also find encouragement that even if you're surrounded by a broken, sinful people, and if it seems like the drama and the struggle and the disappointments in your life never end, God is sovereign, even over that. Even over the little piles of muck you have to deal with every day. He is using even that to bring about His plans. He is not just nullifying those things, but He is actually using those circumstances to further His promises. And if that sounds too good to be true, just wait. The story is only starting to get going. Because not only is God sovereign over all the little sins that we run into every day, He is sovereign over the really big ones too. And we see that in verse 18 of chapter 37 through chapter 38. So to catch up to this section, just need to look back and glance through the verses of 12 through 17 in chapter 37 there. You can see Jacob is oblivious to the fact that Joseph's brothers are in a murderous mood. Favoritism will do that to you. He sends Joseph on a mission. And Joseph is now being sent to go spy on his brothers who are pasturing the flock near Shechem. Jacob wants another report to see how things are going. Here's a little picture of the area of Shechem taken by a little survey that went through many years ago. So that's This is the kind of landscape in which they would go to pasture their flock. So off they go to pasture their flocks in Shechem. Jacob, though, he doesn't trust his sons very much, if you've noticed this. He was a deceiver. He believes his sons have inherited the trait. So Joseph, go get the scoop on your bros. So Joseph goes to Shechem, and he finds out the brothers have moved on to Dothan, which is not necessarily a problem, right? It wasn't like, oh, they left Shechem and went to Dothan. You go where the grass is good. But as we're going to see, it's very fortuitous in the plans of God that they went to Dothan. Here's a quick picture of Dothan. As you can see, a similar setting, flat land. But what's particularly interesting of Dothan, if you look at this map that's going to come up now, you'll notice that there is a caravan trade route that goes from the high hill country of Judea down through the Shephelah, which is the low-lying hills that run along the western side of the hill country of Judea, down to the coastal plains that run along the edge of the Mediterranean Sea. And that trade route curves around not the city of Shechem, but the city of Dothan. And so God moves this whole interaction that's about to take place coincidentally from the larger city of Shechem to the less significant but precisely positioned city of Dothan. Dothan is a great place to do two things. One is pasture sheep, and the other is ambush people. This is also, in addition to where Joseph's brothers are going to ambush him, this is also later where Elisha opens the king's eyes and sees all of God's troops on the hills getting ready to ambush the enemies of Israel. So Dothan is a great place to ambush people. And it has, like I said, the other claim to fame of being the traveling route for caravans going from the north to Egypt. And so we catch up to Joseph in chapter 37, verse 18, as he comes and approaches his brothers in Dothan. And it says in verse 18, when they saw the brothers, him, Joseph, from a distance, and before he came close to them, they plotted against him to put him to death. The anger in the hearts of Joseph's brothers has reached a boiling point. These boys may be shepherds, but they aren't tame. Remember, this is the same group of young men who, back in chapter 34, responded to the rape of their sister by deceiving an entire city, murdering every single male in that city, stealing all the stuff from every house, and then taking every woman and child off as spoils. Right? These boys can be mean. They're dangerous. I often tell our young men in our youth ministry, I want you to grow up to be dangerous but good. These men are dangerous and volatile. And so the first big sin we see here is murder in their hearts. They have a plan: kill Joseph and toss him into one of the many pits dotting the landscape. These pits can be naturally occurring. Often they were also hand dug to hold rainwater. And we see Reuben step in, possibly in an attempt to gain the favor of his father back after having slept with his father's wife, Bilhah. Right? That's awkward if you've slept with your brother's mom. But this, again, is the dysfunction of this family. So Reuben steps in to change the plans. Instead of kill Joseph, throw him in the pit, what if we reverse that and we throw Joseph in the pit and then just let him get killed? And his brothers say, yeah, that sounds less messy, let's do that. And so we see the callousness, though, in verses 23 through 25, in which they carry out this plan, right? There's no big confrontation. There's no monologuing back and forth. They just walk up, rip Joseph's coat off, and throw him in the pit. Just like no big deal. So callous. This pit has no water in it, so Joseph's life isn't in immediate danger, but in a wilderness such as this, the chances of rescue are almost none. Some wonder if the lack of water in this pit also sort of presages the famine that will come later. But see that after this has taken place, Joseph's brothers haven't even lost their appetite, and they just sit down to have lunch. So where is God in this? How could a loving God allow something like this to happen? Have you ever felt ambushed by life and tossed into a pit? Have you ever felt helpless and abandoned yourself? Joseph is now sitting in darkness, and we'll find out later in the story, he's crying out for mercy. and slowly coming to the realization that his brothers, who are sitting within earshot, because later they will tell about listening to his cries, are just munching on lunch and don't care. Into this situation enters an amazing coincidence. At just this time, near just this pit, comes a caravan of Ishmaelites. The brothers decide to sell Joseph and profit off his fate. Why waste a perfectly good product when you can sell it? Think of that. We can almost better understand a group of people getting whipped into an emotional frenzy of hatred and lashing out in a murderous rage. But to see brothers listening to the cries of their brother while munching on lunch coolly decide, let's sell him into slavery and make some money. It's a hard thing for us to understand. And look at as well here, we see the generational impact of sin. Who are these caravanners? They're Ishmaelites. These are the descendants of their own ancestor Abraham through Ishmael. These are the estranged cousins of their own great-grandpa. Now the rift between brothers 3 generations ago is lining up with the rift between brothers in the present, and family sells family as a slave to their own relatives. How messed up is this? Sin is powerful and sin is ugly, but sin is not ultimate. Why is God allowing this to happen? Joseph has no idea. Joseph's brothers aren't taking God into account in this at all, but God is sovereign, and he is moving the pieces into place for an incredible story of salvation and redemption. And so in verses 29 through 36, we see the wrap-up of the scene. Reuben returns from we don't know where, but he finds Joseph sold. He has a little meltdown. He knows as the oldest, this will probably be pinned on him. He can't imagine how he will ever be accepted by his father again. The other brothers follow through on their cover-up. They dip the cloak in blood of an animal. They return it to their father. And then the little heartless fellows pretend, oh, we found this. I think I vaguely remember Joseph having a similar coat. Can you look at it and tell me? This isn't Joseph's, is it? Jacob sees the coat. He comes to his own conclusion that a beast has devoured his son and enters into a profound grief. In Middle Eastern culture, mourning is a community affair. You gather to grieve. The text is explicit here, however, that Jacob refuses all comfort from his sons and his daughters. He could not see how there would ever be joy in his life again and expects to die in grief. And in so doing, he rejects not only the comfort of his children, but also the comfort of his God. When our hearts are overwhelmed by circumstances, it is easy to forget about God or to be angry at God. And that is a great poison to take into one's soul, to be parted from God with a heavy heart. So Jacob weeps alone in the land of Canaan, and meanwhile Joseph has reached the slave market of Egypt and happens to catch the eye of a particularly prominent slave owner, Potiphar, Pharaoh's officer and captain of the bodyguard. And so what must Joseph be wondering as he is inducted into the household of Potiphar as a slave? He's likely only about 17 or 18 still at this point, completely cut off from everything he has ever known. And now we must leave him briefly and turn our attention to another major sin that intersects with our story at this point, and that's chapter 38. And the second major sin we're going to see is that of adultery. Chapter 38 might at first seem to be totally out of place, but it serves a very important role. This is the story of Judah and Tamar. And briefly, we see a family falling apart. Jacob is in a state of depression. He doesn't care much about what's going on around him, and Judah decides he doesn't care very much about his dad either. And so Judah says, I'm out of here. And he moves off to go visit an Adullamite who lives in a city near Hebron. And the events of this chapter span many years, so trying to figure out exactly what the gap is between all the events is difficult. But at some point, as Judah's just living off by himself, he meets a woman in Canaan and takes her for his wife, and she bears him 3 sons, Er, Onan, and Shelah. Enough time passes, Er grows up, he needs a wife. Judah finds a woman to marry him also from Canaan, named Tamar. And this is where things get interesting. We finally read of God's direct intervention in the story. Though at the time it likely wasn't obvious to Judah. Judah, probably not a very great father at this point in his life. and his sons not following the Lord either. Genesis 38:7 says this, but Judah's firstborn, was evil in the sight of the Lord, so the Lord took his life. Especially you young people, that happens. Every once in a while, a young person decides, I'm going to live my own way and be foolish and sinful and rebellious against God, and God's like, okay, I'm going to kill you. You don't mess with God. So this happens. And Judah, interestingly enough, is not described as grieving over his son at all. In stark contrast with Jacob, he just simply tells his next son, hey, Er's dead. You need to go fulfill the rites of levirate marriage and help Tamar bear a son to carry on the line of Er. So Onan selfishly avoids this duty as well, and God strikes him dead. God is not messing around with the line of Judah. So Judah, not wanting to lose his third and last son, tells Tamar, live as a widow in your father's house until the youngest son, Shelah, is older. And by doing that, by saying live in your father's house as a widow, he is saying you're not allowed to seek remarriage. He's saying you're not allowed to go out and try to find another spouse. Judah has no intention to give her Shelah to bear a line. He's just benching her. Tamar eventually figures this out. As Shelah grows up, is of the age to produce a line, Judah is nowhere to be seen, and she says, I'm going to take matters into my own hand. She finds out Judah's going on a trip and does an end run around Judah's deceptiveness. She dresses as a prostitute, gets ahead of Judah, waits for him beside a road. And notice she doesn't even have to seduce Judah. Judah just walks by Caesar and says, hey, let me sleep with you. This is Judah, Lion of the tribe of Judah. This is Judah. She wisely takes Judah's staff and seal as collateral after this. And later, when she is found to be pregnant, Judah says, bring her out and burn her. He's furious that she has defied his authority and wants her to die. Tamar produces the collateral and gives it to Judah with almost the exact same wording that Judah had given when he presented the bloody cloak to Jacob. This is what you call divine poetic justice. And so just as Judah deceived Jacob, so now he is deceived and admits that he has met his match. Tamar gives birth not to just one, but two sons. Zerah, who stuck his arm out first and then pulled it back in, was the technical firstborn because of that, and Perez, who was the one actually born first. So what's this all about? How is the tale of marrying Canaanite women and having adultery and losing your sons connected to anything that God is doing? Well, to begin with, it serves an important role in the function of this story. Because remember, this story isn't about Joseph. It's about Jacob, Judah, and Joseph in that order. And this story is a redemption story about Judah. And this is Judah's low point. This is Judah, the one who convinces his brothers to sell their brother Joseph into slavery. This is Judah running away from home and marrying Canaanite women and having affairs with prostitutes. This is Judah's low point. And we're going to watch what God is going to do in his heart, and a very different Judah is going to show up later. But something else is going on. God is putting together a very particular family tree. The second-born son of a Canaanite woman, by prostitution, will lead to a son who marries a Canaanite prostitute, who gives birth to a son who will marry the descendant of Lot's daughters after they had had incest with their father. That's a messed up family, isn't it? That's King David's family. That's Jesus' family. Perez is going to become the descendant or the ancestor of Christ. And so God uses all this messed up sin in the land of Canaan to produce the messianic line through Judah. Is God in control of what's going on? Always. Is his plan moving forward? Always. Will his promises come to pass? Always. A few brief lessons. God's sovereignty over little sins should cause us to repent from our sins so that we may enjoy his blessings sooner. We'll never stop God's work, but we can choose to cooperate in a state of blessing or choose to not cooperate in a state of disobedience. It should also cause us to endure the sins of others, knowing God's plans are moving forward. God's sovereignty over big sins should cause us to trust him, even when we're completely overwhelmed in the moment. And that will happen when you run into a big sin. Either something you've done and you've realized your sinfulness, or something that's happened to you and you're devastated by the sin of others. Run to God even when you don't have the strength to understand. And second, turn to God as the redeeming power in a broken world. There is no other way to make sense of what goes on than to look to the one whose sovereign plans are able to take even sin and turn it back for good. Joseph's life is going to turn now to a season of suffering and slavery. And God is going to show his sovereignty over all of that. But we are just fresh out of time. And so next week, we're going to try to cover chapters 39 through 50. We'll see how that goes. This week, as you leave, I don't know where you're at in your life. But I do know this. God is sovereign over the circumstances in your life. And as we began with the words of Horatio Spafford, let me close with the rest of the words to that hymn that he wrote. And these are the original lyrics. They've been changed somewhat in the way we commonly sing them. But this is the heart of faith that was true for Joseph, it was true for Horatio, and may it be true for us as well as the music team comes up to sing our closing song together. Though Satan should buffet, though trials should come, let this blessed assurance control that Christ has regarded my helpless estate and hath shed his own blood for my soul. My sin, oh, the bliss of this glorious thought, my sin, not in part but the whole, is nailed to the cross, and I bear it no more. Praise the Lord, O my soul. For me, be it Christ hence to live, if Jordan above me should roll. No pang shall be mine, for in death as in life, thou wilt whisper thy peace to my soul. But Lord, 'tis for thee, for thy coming we wait. The sky, not the grave, is our goal. O trump of the angel, O voice of the Lord, blessed hope, blessed rest of my soul. And the last verse, and Lord, haste the day when my faith shall be sight, the clouds be rolled back as a scroll. The trump shall resound, and the Lord shall descend, a song in the night, O my soul. And for us who, like Horatio, live on this side of the cross, let us not be ever caught in the wilderness without a faith in the sovereignty of our God who works all things for his glory and our good. Would you stand and sing?